All right, sorry about that. Had a little technical difficulty with the music. For some reason, it did not want to stop playing. Glad you're here. My name is Tim Riddle, as you probably know. If you've joined one of my either YouTube or Facebook sites for one word, kicked this off last Sunday and had some technical difficulties. We were able to go to Facebook, we weren't able to go to YouTube. But tonight, hopefully, it looks like, as I'm looking, it looks like it's working in both places. So glad to be able to have you join me either live or if you're joining, if you're watching this past time, past the live time, appreciate you doing that as well. Um, we won't call this tonight, we call it one word. And last week I talked a little bit about this. I'll just go through it really briefly. But the idea came thinking about the little bit of the noise and the craziness in the world right now. And it would be a loss for me not to even mention, what's going on in this past week in our world, and a lot of confusion, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and so forth. And in fact, the word that we're going to talk about tonight probably fits what's going on in our world in the past week. And I didn't plan that. I actually planned to talk about this word earlier in the week before all this happened. But anyway, we'll see how that lines up. But I wanted to just sort of look at Sunday nights and say, hey, you're getting ready for the week. Maybe there's you're kind of trying to get things set, trying to focus in, planning for the week. You got a million things on your mind. What if you could just take one word and focus on that word for the week? Now, what does that do? Just talking about a word. Well, one thing that, as many of you know, the name of my business is Discover Blind Spots. And we believe that the little slogan we use a lot of times is what you don't see can actually hurt you. And so a blind spot is something that you can't see, and so the best way to get rid of a blind spot is to shine light on it. So the idea is that if we can shine some light on these words, maybe these words aren't blind spots, but maybe they're words that perhaps need to move front and center within your life, your leadership, your parenting skills, your as a husband or wife, how you interact with your teams, and so forth. So that's what we hope to do. Now, as I said this last week, this is not a sales pitch. So I'm not here to sell you anything. I do have a business, but that's not what this is. I've showed up to live streams before, and at the end of it, there, people will say, "Hey, click this button, and I'll sell you this service or this product," and so forth. That's not what this is. I really just wanted to share some of my life experience and and what I've learned from things that probably most of things that I've done wrong. A few things maybe I've done right, but just share some of that with you. That's all it is. So there's no bait and switch by any means. I do have one request though. If you are on YouTube or if you're on Facebook, you don't have to do this now, but if you would go to YouTube at some point and kind of spread this word, the image that you see on the screen there is actually my YouTube channel. You can get to it the simplest way is just to type in YouTube under the search Tim Riddle Discover Blind Spots. And if you would subscribe, it doesn't mean that I'm going to harass you with lots of notifications and all that. In fact, you won't even get a notification unless you choose to do so. But if I get 100 subscribers on YouTube, then I can actually own the domain youtube.com/Tim Riddle. And so nobody has that, but I have to have 100 subscribers in order to do it. As you can see, I have 45 now, so I've got 55 to go. So if you could spread that word for me, that's the only thing that I would ask. If there's a chance to do that, that would be great. All right, so let's get moving and let's talk about the word for this week. And the word is values. And as I said, I think in what's going on in our world right now, it seems that people are questioning values constantly, and probably rightfully so. So that's what I want to really talk about, this meaning of values. And you might say, well, Tim, that's a pretty simple word. I have values. Why are we talking about that? My question and challenge for you tonight is, I'm sure you have values. I'm sure there are values you live by, but have you written them down? Have you identified them? Do you make your decisions by them? If you don't, then I would advocate then they're really not your values, that you haven't defined them. So let's look at the definition first of all. Always, when you're looking at a new word, it's always good to think about what's the definition. And I like this one. It says the principles that give our lives meaning and allow us to persevere through adversity. And I think that's probably the most significant thing about values to me, is that we all have tons of values that we think we live by until we have a time of adversity. And that's when we truly are able to tell. You've heard that saying, right? You show your true colors during a time of adversity, a time of trials and tribulations. That's when it's extremely important to make sure that your values are defined by all means. And so that kind of brings me to the next little slide here, and that is values are critical when when you need to make decisions. In other words, every decision that you make, you should run through your values, kind of that value funnel to determine, and that's how it should, should inform your decisions. Decisions should become easier the more clarity you have around the values that you live by. Because here's what's happening. If you don't choose your values, in other words, if you say, I have values, but they're kind of loose and they change, and, it depends on the situation. And, I have a whole bunch, but, sometimes I focus on these and sometimes I focus on the others. Here's what's going to happen. If you don't choose your values and put a spotlight on them and nail them down, they're going to choose you. And it might not be the ones that you want. The other thing that values are so critical, if you don't put your values front and center, it's like being in a boat in the middle of a lake or an ocean or whatever, what body of water, and you don't have a row, a paddle, a motor, anything, and you're going to drift. And that drifting may not be to your preferred destination. So it's just so critical that we define what our values are. I love this quote by Roy Disney. This was Walt Disney's brother. I think it was his older brother. And he says, it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. That's right. I mean, when you're clear on your values, it's not hard to make decisions. When our kids were little or younger, and they're in their teenage years, I always, sometimes when they would go out, I would say to them, hey, do you know what you would do if you're faced with this tonight? And I would always want them to have that answer before they were faced with something than having to decide it once it, on the spot, because I was afraid that, well, maybe that decision wouldn't be as clear. And basically what was I saying? Are you clear on the values, on your values, before you head out tonight in case you face something that's a tough decision? Are you clear on what those values need to be? All right, let's talk a little bit about. I'm gonna look over here to see. I see. I'll pop this up. My buddy Adam Tarwacki said, "I subscribed. You're welcome. Thank you, Adam, for doing that." Carolyn Braxton, thanks for joining. Say hello to all my good friends at Brick Church, and again, Cindy Jordan, great to have you on here as well tonight. So here's what I want to do. I want to spend just a second. I want to share with you my three values for the business, but it's also values that are personal as well. And here they are. They're just three. And notice there are only two words each for each one. It's only consisted of two words. first, I want to be highly responsive. Second, I want to be incredibly kind. Third, I want to be overly generous. Um, those are the values. Very simple. You've seen values before where you go into a business and they have these value statements that has, 10, 15, 20 different items and so forth. And what I would say, maybe I'm a little bit of a cynic, but I would say those values are for public persona. It's not what they live out, because it's impossible to live out all of those. So for me, these three values identified about a year after I started my business. The reason I waited is I wanted to kind of look back and see, how did I make decisions? How did I operate? How did I operate not only with my clients, but how did I operate with my family and so forth over this period of time? And I decided that I wanted to be highly responsive. In other words, there's something that was important to me, is to be able to respond. The majority of my business, for example, that I get is because I'm first to the plate. So I want to be responsive. Number two, I want to be incredibly kind. As I get older, I just think we want to do business and we want to be around people we enjoy being around. So I just want to be kind. And number three, I want to be overly generous. As I started the business of consulting and working with people, a lot of times I had coaches that were coaching me that would say, you better define what you're going to do and what your deliverables are, or people will take advantage of you. And what I've found is that's not the case. The more generous I've been, the more generous I've been able to receive. Now, it hasn't been conditional. I haven't expected it, but it is more than paid for itself if I've been generous. I just want to be overly, overly generous. And these values define everything that we do, everything that I do in the business. My son Fletcher works with me. And a real quick story here. Fletcher, we were at the beach this past week on vacation. The whole family was, and we had a client that we were trying to finish up a project for them, and so it carried into our vacation, and we knew that. And so we were working on it one afternoon, trying to finish it up, and just we wanted to help. And Carly said, she walked in and she said, "Y'all are still working on that?" She said, "Why are you doing this on your vacation?" And Fletcher immediately said, because we want to be highly responsive. And what I loved about that is that it wasn't a question. It wasn't are we going to do it or are we not going to do it? He had a reason for why we were spending some time on our vacation working for a client. And we're grateful to do that. The client was gracious for what we did. But why? Because we had a value that was defined. All right, let me leave you with kind of three ways. If you're going to create values, here's three suggestions that I would have for you. And then maybe we'll have a minute or two to engage here at the end. Number one, write them down. In other words, you might say, I know what my values are. Write them down. If you haven't written them down, then you can't really say that you've identified what your true values are that you live by, and again, that you make your decisions by. Number two, make sure they're short words and short sentences. Write them for yourself. Don't write them in a way that'll sound elaborate for others to read. Your values are for you. They're identified as to how you are going to live. Trust me, people will understand your values by the actions and decisions that you make. You don't need to post some flowery language for others. It needs to be short words, short sentences, highly responsive, incredibly kind, overly generous. Those are easy for me to say. I don't need to pull out a sheet of paper to look at them. And number three, 3 to 4 values to start with. I listened to somebody the other day and they said, I have these values and I have 10 code of conduct rules that I follow. Well, maybe he can, but for me, 3 or 4 is all I can really put a spotlight on. Can they change? Or can I add some? Maybe that's the better word. Possibly you could, but identify 3 or 4 that you shine the light on and you say, I'm going to wake up and when I interact with people and when I make my decisions, I'm going to run it through these 3 or 4 values filters. So that's really it. Write them down, short word sentences, only 3 or 4. So my challenge for you this week is, if you haven't written your values down, write them down and put them somewhere you can see them every day. And then sit with it to see if indeed those are the values that you want to spotlight and put front and center in your life, both your personal life, your leadership, your work life as well. Let's look, see who else is on. Thank you, Wade Global Market. Thanks for that. Virgil, greetings to you as well. Anybody have any thoughts or suggestions? Jan, thanks for joining. Any ideas about your values? Anybody, do you have a value that you put in the comments that we can chat about for 2 seconds? Looks like my time's almost up. We'll wait here just for a second to see if anybody pops something in. So important, and perhaps maybe I'll close with this. As we think about, as we're in prayer about the tragic occurrence that happened this week with the loss of life and so forth. But I was watching the news earlier today. Actually, it was early this morning. I was flipping through. And I thought about that, and I'd already decided I was going to talk about values. And I thought, that's really what everybody's questioning is, are we living up to the right kind of values? So important to have those identified on the front end. So I think we're about out of time. I promised I'd keep it to 15 minutes, and so I'm 2 minutes over. Thanks for joining. Write your values down this week. Put them on a sheet of paper. Put them on the refrigerator. Sit with them. Evaluate your day to determine, when I made decisions today, did I make them through the lens of the values I've written down? If you didn't, then obviously we need to change some actions, or we need to determine what a new set of values are.